Good morning. You are listening to National Real Estate Auction Radio. I am your host, Doug Dennison, and we are broadcasting from beautiful St. Augustine, Florida, the nation's oldest city, at WFOY 1240 AM studios. Through the power of the internet, this program is being streamed worldwide on 1240news.com. The show will also be archived on rawauctions.com, as they are the sponsor of this program. Additionally, this show will be posted on youtube.com. We're going to be talking about real estate auctions, past auctions, upcoming auctions, different real estate markets across the country. We've got a lot of topics today. And to help us out, we've got some very important people calling in. I'm going to do a little bit different today. As you know, my rant, if you will, for the last year or so is these 14,000 government surplus properties. So we've had congressmen on, we've had, senator offices being involved. I've been up to Washington, D.C. 3 or 4 times this year, actually twice in October. And, we're trying to figure out a way to get the House and Senate to get ready to sell these 14,000 government surplus properties, and have been talking about that for again, months and months and months. But today we're going to be talking more about Florida and going to be talking about real estate. And we've got a great caller coming in, and I see the call now. Let's get him on the line. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, Doug. It's John Sebree.
Well, John, thank you so much for calling, and we have not met yet, but I've heard good things about you, and looking forward to this discussion today. As you know, it's election day. Everything is crazy, and everything is kind of last minute, and the push and everything. Tell us exactly who you are, what you do, and where you're from, John.
Great. Well, I am John Sebree, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Florida Realtors, which is an association of 115,000 realtors in the state of Florida, making us the largest professional trade association in the state.
Mm-hmm.
I actually live in Tallahassee, so I happen to be in Orlando today. Like you said, the crazy election has people all over the place, and yesterday was Tallahassee, then Tampa, and now Orlando.
Well, I did see a text from you yesterday saying you were in Tampa traffic, and then talking about Orlando, and know your home is in Tallahassee, so I was wondering where you would be today. Tell us a little bit about your past, because I saw your past, and your bio was very interesting, and let me know how you got to the Florida Realtors.
Well, sure. That's something that's really fun to talk about, and I'm seldom asked about, so I appreciate the question. I actually grew up in Kentucky, and north of Lexington, south of Cincinnati. Grew up there, went to undergraduate at Northern Kentucky University, where I was the student body president, and my dream was to move to Washington, D.C. and find a way to make a difference. And I was fortunate that 2 Kentucky congressmen, one Republican and one Democrat, were on the same subcommittee of the U.S. House Banking Committee. And they said, you're just graduating as a student body president. The 2 of us together could put in a good word for you. And I think that's probably led to my bipartisan nature ever since, because it was an incredible time. Because imagine this, I was 21 years old, and it was the savings and loan crisis of 1989-90.
Wow.
And I was working for the U.S. House Banking Committee dealing with the savings and loan crisis. So if there was ever a baptism by fire, I had it. So after 2 years with the House Banking Committee, the U.S. House of Representatives, the National Association of Realtors hired me. Obviously, they had a great interest in what we were doing in Congress and worked with me some and said, they'd like for me to join their team. And so I was fortunate enough to go to work for the National Realtors after only 2 years on Capitol Hill. And then suddenly I'd been there 13 years, which made 15 years in Washington.
Uh-huh.
And, time just flies. So then my friends in Florida, I actually was the National Realtors lobbyist working with the congressional delegations of 8 states, and Florida was one of those. And, of course, we've always had a colorful congressional delegation here in Florida. And the Florida Realtors said they would like for me to consider moving to Tallahassee from Washington to work for them and represent their interests at the state capitol. So after saying no for about 3 months, they finally convinced me that it was the right thing to do. And now here I am 8.5 years later. I've been in Tallahassee.
Well, excellent background. Hopefully we'll have time in the program to talk about that time where you were up there really in the firea, basically the bailout for the SNL, and I want to talk to you about that. But we're here today to talk about Amendment 4, which is very important. Really the housing market, can really help this economy a great deal, and I think you guys are trying to push that forward. So tell us everything about Amendment 4. Tell us the pros, cons, what you're doing, and also, how this will help the economy.
Sure. And, it's probably good to think back to the time that I moved to Florida 8 years ago. You'll remember Jeb Bush was governor, and lots of properties were changing hands. And I remember one of the first legislative sessions that I got here, the state had a $4 billion budget surplus. Local governments had money coming in that they didn't know what to do with, so they were building their Taj Mahal, city halls and county commission buildings and that kind of thing.
Yep.
And they've had a short memory because we can directly tie the strength of the real estate market to the surpluses in government revenue. It's pretty well known that when someone buys a house, they then go out and buy a refrigerator and a stove, and they need someone, because they were living in an apartment, they didn't need a lawnmower, but now they have a house and they need one, and so they go to Sears and they do all these things. The ripple effect through the economy is pretty huge. In fact, it's $60,000. For every home purchase, an additional $60,000 is pumped into the economy because of this ripple effect that it has. And I say that by way of background because we believe that's what Amendment 4 can do. It can take us back to a time where we do have budget surpluses and there won't be a problem. So, as you know, Save Our Homes was put in the Florida Constitution back in the early 1990s. And so now that it's been in the Constitution for 20 years, we start to see the inequities that it causes. Well, we'll never change Save Our Homes. The public in Florida will always want their 3% assessment cap on their homestead property, and nothing will ever change about that. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing to note, that Amendment 4 does not change that. It actually makes it better because we decided that there needed to be comprehensive property tax reform. None of this nickel and dime kind of thing. Let's do some really great things for every property owner and every person who wants to be a property owner in Florida. So the current homestead owner has something in Amendment 4, and that's pretty interesting. What most people didn't realize when they voted themselves Save Our Homes and a 3% assessment cap was that even when their property value falls, their assessment can still go up that 3% per year. So the last couple of years we've seen it. Homestead property owners like me have seen our just value fall of our property. The value of our property has fallen, yet our assessment has continued to go up 3% per year. Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting about that is people would say, why doesn't the legislature fix that? Well, it's in the Florida Constitution. The legislature doesn't have the power to fix now the power to fix that, what's called recapture.
Okay.
Local government's recapturing your tax revenue. So that's a really exciting part of this for the homestead owner. Then as I've traveled Florida for these 8 years, I've found that property owners, potential property owners, first responders, teachers, people who want to live in the community they serve say that when they go to buy their first home, and they might buy an identical home to yours, right next door to you,
right,
because it reassesses upon sale, they're paying taxes on a far different amount than you are because you've lived in your home for 10 years or 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so we needed the challenges to save our homes in the past. The court challenges have been the unfair treatment this unfair effect that it has on the public. So the second part of this amendment gives first-time buyers relief that phases out over 5 years while their Save Our Homes is phasing in. So it just creates a fairness for the first-time buyer. And then the third thing that it does is put a 5% assessment cap on all non-homestead properties. So you and I on our homestead have the 3% cap, and in the Florida Constitution there's a 10% cap on non-homestead properties. And that's everything from vacant land to, you may own a vacant lot next door to yourself. Well, the county can increase the property taxes on that vacant lot 10% per year, much faster than the cost of living increases. Small business owners, the mom and pop down on the corner, they can't plan from year to year because their property taxes could go up 10% on their building, and they need some kind of relief. So this would cap their property tax increase at 5% per year.
Interesting.
So it does three really significant things,
Yep.
all wrapped up into one amendment.
I have a question, and the first-time home buyers. What is the definition of a first-time home buyer? And I apologize because you would think that would be straightforward, but is there, if somebody did buy a house and then got in economic trouble and then did not own a house for years and then bought another house, is that a first-time home buyer?
Well, the legislature went with the federal definition of a first-time home buyer. So when you have federal programs like the old Farmers Home Administration that does rural housing loans, or
Yep.
FHA, or the Treasury Department defines a first-time home buyer as someone who hasn't owned in 3 years.
Okay.
For the purposes of this amendment, these are first-time homestead buyers. So anyone who hasn't owned a homestead property in Florida in the last 3 years would be considered a first-time homestead buyer. There had to be a limit put on it.
Sure.
And originally some said, well, actually, this happened. There was an amendment on the ballot 2 years ago that got kicked off the ballot that would have done the same thing, but the Florida Senate put in that it had to be anyone who hadn't owned a home anywhere in the United States in the last 7 years. And we worked with the cities and counties on this, and we said, well, how would a county property appraiser know whether someone's owned a home in Iowa in the last 7 years? That would be such a difficult task to figure out. So this is a much more streamlined, simplified version.
Good point. Good point. And I was going towards, this, you talked about when you first came 8 years ago, and I actually was working down in South Florida. I was a district sales manager for the Kai's company in Boynton Beach, and
Oh, okay.
and just amazing the amount of traffic and sales, and I could do no wrong, as you say, because you'd list a house and you'd get multiple people, and people were actually using the houses as I like to say retirement, because they saw that the stock market wasn't helping that much, and you couldn't put money in savings account and give you much, and they kept on seeing real estate going up and up and up, and so they kind of speculated a bit and said, okay, I'm living in a $200,000 house right now. I think I'm going to stretch, get a $300,000 house, and that's the way it went. But then all of a sudden, what goes up has to go down. It's something that happens all over the country in different areas, and it's all location. But a lot of people have been foreclosed on, and a lot of people have gone from homeowners to renters now. And so that was my question, as we're trying to beef up the economy, and the housing market has always been a big part of that. If we can get people who have, been in dire straits for a few years, and if they can get an incentive to buy again down the road, I think that would be a positive, right?
Well, I totally think it would, and we could do an entire show. I'd be happy to come back and do a show on the credit crisis that we're in.
Yep.
Because of the pendulum swung so far back in the other direction. I mean, you and I know, just as you said, anyone with a pulse was able to get a mortgage,
yes,
and that was not a good thing.
Right.
And now the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction, credit-worthy buyers cannot get a loan.
Yep.
But if they can get a loan and they can buy a house, I can almost guarantee you their mortgage payment would be less than they're paying in rent right now.
Yep.
And so, it makes all the sense in the world to get people who are spending a much higher percentage of their monthly income on rent into a property where they're gaining equity. And, prices are going to only go up from this point. I think, I can pretty much go out on a limb and say we've hit the bottom on prices in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And we now have good records to show that we have a number of months in a row.
Yep.
So this isn't a blip on the screen. We have a number of months in a row of increased sales price.
Yep.
And so, you can't say that in all parts of the United States.
No, not at all.
But Florida, Florida was one of the first states to enter the economic downturn because we are sort of heavy on second homeowners and vacation owners, and people will cut out of vacation too, even if they're just coming down to visit.
Yep.
When times are tight.
Yep.
But we find we're among the first to pull out of the economic recession.
Well, that's been a wonderful thing, and I've stayed very close to the South Florida market, and had Mike Pappas on, the CEO of Kai's company, and several of his staff on, and by the way, I did ask him about Amendment 4 and wanted to make sure that he was for it, and of course he said yes, and
sorry to interrupt. The most impressive thing to me about that South Florida market right now, I was just speaking at an international real estate conference, and when you tell people that, let's see, 2 years ago, if I had been on your show, I would have said there's 10 years of inventory in the Miami market.
Yep.
Of all those condos. They're down to under 4 months of inventory because they're just booming down there.
They are booming.
It's impressive. And so, that's a long way off from where we thought we'd be.
Well, and again, we had Ralph DiMartino on just a week or so ago, and of course he talked about the influx of buyers and how South Florida is doing, and it doesn't seem that long ago when all those cranes in downtown Miami were, just sitting still, and they really, as Miami goes, sometimes people look at what's happening, and that's the sexy story, and thousands of condos that are not going to be used, and that's the international story, national story. And so when you see that, as somebody in Des Moines, Iowa, you're thinking, my gosh, Florida is down the tubes. And to see that come back so quickly, because I would have never guessed, just like you, how quickly it got back. I mean, that's great for not only South Florida, but for Florida in general.
Definitely. You could not be more right.
Yeah. Tell us again a more push on the Amendment 4. This is a Florida legislation and coming up and voting. How do people know about it? And, you know, a lot of times people, you know, they understand maybe some of the big issues that are out there, but then they finally get to the voting polls and they see a whole bunch of amendments and they have no clue that, you know, geez, what's this? This sounds good, and it's really a sentence long definition that's going to make many people say, yes or no.
Exactly.
So how do you kind of combat that and say this is a good thing, people?
Well, I think there are several things. First of all, you know, you're right. This is an unusual election cycle, first of all, because we have the presidential and we have a nasty U.S. Senate race, and people are just tired of this.
Yep.
So negative.
Yep.
We knew that we had to stand out from the crowd because there were 11 statewide amendments on the ballot, not to mention a lot of local issues that are on your own ballot,
sure,
depending on where you live.
Sure.
And so we started about a year ago with a more creative approach. We thought we have to stand out from the crowd, so we created a campaign called Are You Getting Your Assets Taxed Off?
Okay.
And we thought by doing something clever, we might be able to get people's attention and they would at least go to our website and learn more about it. And as they learn about it, and as they understand that it's about property tax relief, they really get it, and they want to vote yes, especially when they see that we worked with schools to exempt schools from this. So the first-time homestead owner relief, the 5% assessment cap, those do not cut school funding. They only relate to your city and county property taxes, not the portion attributable to schools. So when you hear someone telling you not to vote yes,
right,
it's the cities and counties that are spending our tax dollars, your tax dollars and my tax dollars, to fight tax relief for us. And that's so frustrating because they have the bully pulpit. We know that they've spent a minimum of $2 million on their campaign to destroy this, and that's just really sad.
Well, it is. And
it's short-sighted because we know that Amendment 4 creates a minimum of 20,000 new jobs. We know that it increases the gross domestic product of the state. We know that it increases personal wealth among Floridians by over $5 billion. And just knowing that it creates fairness in an unfair system is so important. Yet it's really tough to get that message out this election because the airwaves are just jammed with other political messages.
Well, John, you got really good stuff here. We need to do a little bit more of this if you could. I've got to take a couple minutes for some radio spots. Can you hold on so we can come back? Okay. Again, this is the National Real Estate Auction Radio Show. We have John Sebree, who is the Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Florida Realtors. We're going to go for a couple of minutes of important ads, and we'll be back with John again, Senior Vice President for Public Policy, Florida Realtors, talking about Amendment 4. This is a time-sensitive issue, folks, and so hold on, and we will be right back. All right, we're back. You're listening to National Real Estate Auction Radio Show. I'm your host, Doug Dennison. We're broadcasting live from beautiful St. Augustine, Florida. We have an important guest, John Sebree, who's the Senior Vice President for Public Policy for the Florida Realtors. John, are you still on?
I am here with you.
Great, great. I'm going to go back to Amendment 4, and you know we're listening to WFOY 1240 AM studios right now, and it's going to go on YouTube, and people can listen through the internet throughout the world. However, the most important radio station for most people is WIIFM, and that's What's in It for Me station. And so we as general public will listen and say, well, I understand why the realtors would want this, but make a case for John Doe public. How is this going to help if we can get this amendment passed? I heard you say something about $60,000. That is an extra payments for everybody when one house sells, and I heard about 20,000 more jobs. Tell the general public why this would be good and why on Election Day they need to mark yes for Amendment 4.
Well, I'm happy to do so, and I'm glad you asked. First and foremost, having a strong economy is good for all of us, and a strong real estate market is required for us to have a strong and vibrant economy in Florida. So that's sort of a big picture. But then individually, if I am a homestead owner in Florida, which I am and many of your listeners will be,
right,
I don't like the fact that the government can keep increasing my property taxes when my property value falls, as it has over the last couple of years.
Okay.
This amendment is for them because this finally gives the legislature the power that they don't currently have to make sure that my property tax assessment cannot increase if my property value falls. Then, if I'm a mom-and-pop grocery store or convenience store, or I own some vacant land, or a rental building, a 4-unit rental building, whatever the case may be, any property that's not a homestead property, then this gives them a 5% assessment cap, which isn't obviously as good as the 3% assessment cap that those of us who are homestead owners have, but it's a much more fair system, and it allows them to plan for the future, and it allows them to not increase their rents on their tenants when their property taxes go up every year. So that's a really positive thing. And then, thirdly, those young buyers that have never owned a home before,
right,
that have the dream of home ownership, this allows them a much more fair property tax system when they buy in, and that additional relief that they get as a first-time Florida homestead owner phases out as their Save Our Homes is phasing in. So there are so many reasons to vote for this, and there's something in it for everyone, and that's what comprehensive property tax reform is about.
Well, that's an excellent explanation. Before we go any further, if I'm a listener, and again, our listeners are the general public, real estate agents, real estate investors, banking officials, bankruptcy attorneys, government people, real estate media, but how can people get a hold of you to find out, or a website where people can get more information on this, because the election's coming up real soon?
Well, there are two easy ways to get more information. First, you can go to FloridaRealtors.org, and that's our association website, and on the front page there is a Yes on 4 icon. Click on that icon and find out any information you want. You know, obviously this is a very long amendment, but we think it has an easy explanation, and we want people to understand the true facts and not what they're hearing from their local governments about how it's going to bankrupt local governments. The other place to go is a website for a third-party group. By the way, we're very happy with all the support that we're getting from, you know, I mentioned I'm in Orlando today.
Right.
The Sentinel. So many state newspapers around the state are advocating Yes on 4. But one of the websites is taxyourassets.off.com, and at that site you can watch videos, you can get more information as well.
Give us that website again.
taxyourassets.off.com.
Okay.
You can also go to that on Facebook, Tax Your Assets Off on Facebook. It has its own site as well.
John, we've been in business for a long, long time, and trying to get messages out is used to be a little more difficult than it is today. Used to take longer than it does today. How has the internet changed your business?
Well, I mean, the internet has changed everything. From how you get messages out, how you spread things. I certainly wish, I've been laughing about how, with my colleagues, about how I wish I could have thought of that silver bullet great idea that would have made Yes on 4 go viral. These crazy videos that go viral and everybody passes them around. I'd love to be more creative and come up with a way to do that. But
me too, John. Me too.
That's the kind of thing the internet has done for us.
Uh-huh.
But, interestingly, more big picture with real estate, people go to the internet to search for houses. They go to Realtor.com.
Yes.
Or they go to their own local real estate company website, and it makes everyone more educated. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of bad information out there.
Yep.
You've probably had the calls about the 3.8% tax that's in the health care bill in Washington. Mm-hmm. Obamacare has a 3.8% tax. Well, I tell you, I get emails about that every single day because there's so much misinformation about it being a 3.8% tax on every home sale. And it isn't. It has to do with dividend income. And again, that's yet another story we could save for another day and do a whole show just on that. But there is so much misinformation out there on the internet. You really have to be careful where you get your information.
Well, I agree. And it's just, in a real simplistic form, you go walk down the street and everybody's got an opinion, and now it's up on the internet. And it's funny that you mentioned, the cat chasing a ball. You will get, 4 million hits, and yet you and I are trying to push out important stuff, and, we don't even come close to that. So we need to be more creative, I think, John, in our plans, and take some more social media courses. I'm not sure.
You're right.
Florida Realtors, and again, you were up in Tallahassee. Again, I'm looking at the bio. You were up in Washington for a long time. When you first started talking about your background, you said you came to Washington through the Kentucky legislators that liked you when you were on the House Representative Committee on Banking, Finance, and Urban Affairs, and got right into the mix of the FIREA legislation and RTC and the bailout. How was that to just jump into that firestorm?
Well, it was fascinating for a young guy from rural Kentucky who, didn't know a lot about that kind of thing, but that's how you learn. And what we did, I hadn't traveled a lot at that point either, but we had field hearings all over the United States to talk to those who had been impacted by the financial sector and the collapse of savings and loans. And so I think it really shaped me into who I am today because, I care a lot about the property owner and the taxpayer and the person who wants to live the American dream.
Right.
I think it goes back to my roots and how I got started. When you travel around, just like now with the storm up in New York and New Jersey, and your heart breaks for people who've lost their home. When you meet someone who's lost everything, it really puts things into perspective for you. And I'll never forget those experiences that I had. And coming before our committee were the top appointed officials, the top Treasury secretaries, and that kind of thing. And that's pretty heady stuff for a young kid.
Yep, absolutely. A quick story. I had just got into the auction business at about that time, and had done a whole bunch of auctions for the FDIC that were kind of like one of the first in '87 and '88, and first commercial real estate auction for the FDIC. And we heard about this bailout that was happening. And so the first draft of the FIREA legislation did not include real estate auctions. And so my boss and I traveled up to Washington, D.C., knew nothing, and just it's a really nice story on what you can do just as a private citizen to make things happen. And we used 4 or 5 letters of reference that I had gotten from FDIC to try to convince the banking committees and everybody that was involved, both on the House and Senate side. And we found a friend in Doug B. Ryder from Nebraska. And John Amick, I believe, was the legislative aide for Doug. And they liked auctions, and they put in the amendment that passed, and that's why all of those RTC auctions came about, and the fact that I was involved in selling probably 6,000 or 7,000 real estate properties for the RTC back in those times all over the country was a little bit about just knocking on people's doors up in Washington and presenting a good case and getting lucky with Doug B. Ryder.
Well, you raise a great point, and that is that we can all make a difference.
Yes.
Sometimes we don't think that our one voice can really have that impact.
Yep.
But every piece of legislation, every item that's in this constitutional amendment language, all of that came from personal stories that people had.
Yep.
And it makes a difference. Getting involved, and I talk about the political influence pyramid sometimes when I'm giving my talks to larger groups. And when you think about how you can so quickly get to the top of the political influence pyramid because the people below you on that pyramid didn't register to vote. Maybe they registered to vote, but they didn't go vote. And then you volunteered your time a little bit, or you made some phone calls. Before long, you put yourself up at the very tip top of the political influence pyramid because you took the time to get involved and learn an issue and express your opinion.
Well, it does. It takes some time and energy, but you can do anything. You can make a difference, and I think that's what you started with when you were a young guy in Kentucky and said, "I want to go to Washington, D.C. to make a difference." Actually, my thing has been working with real estate professionals throughout my career and getting them involved in auctions. And I think an article is coming out in the Florida Realtor about that, on how real estate professionals can make money with real estate auctions. Number 1, registering buyers for an auction. Number 2, auction referrals. Number 3, being local auction headquarters. And number 4 is that real estate professionals know what the property values are. They can go to the auction and buy if there's a bargain. So,
right.
So I'm thrilled to be involved in the Florida Realtors and the Florida Realtor magazine. We need to wrap up, but I want to do one last push for Amendment 4. Tell me again the 3 points and why Joe Public, John Doe, needs to vote yes for Amendment 4.
Great. And again, I appreciate you asking the question, because I believe that Amendment 4 will strengthen Florida's economy, and we have to have a strong real estate market if we're going to see our economy come back and
yes.
jobs come back. And Amendment 4 will create a minimum of 20,000 new jobs, so we need that economic stimulus in Florida. But it does 3 great things. For the homestead property owner today, their property tax assessment still increases 3% per year, even when their property value falls like it has over the last couple of years. The legislature does not have the current ability to fix that because it's in the Florida Constitution. This Amendment 4, voting yes on Amendment 4, gives the legislature the power so they can come back in the very next legislative session in a few months and fix the Florida statute so that if your property value falls, your property tax assessment cannot increase. And that's a wonderful thing. The second thing that it does is provide a 5% assessment cap for non-homestead properties. So this is the rental property down the street from you that's a two-family. This is the vacant land. It's the small business. It's the mom-and-pop motel that's been there for 80 years.
Yep.
Right now, their property taxes can increase 10% per year. They need a more fair system, so it gives them a 5% assessment cap. Still not as good as what you and I enjoy, but it would be a great benefit to them. And then finally, it gives additional homestead relief to first-time homestead owners. These are buyers in Florida, young couples, singles, anyone who has not owned a home in 3 years as their homestead.
Yep.
Be a first-time homestead owner. And very important to remember, the first-time homebuyer relief and the 5% assessment cap that are part of this amendment exempt schools, meaning there is no impact on school funding by voting yes on this amendment.
Well, very, very good. How can people go on a website one more time to figure out more information about this? Give us those websites so that people can look and for themselves make up their minds for voting yes.
They can go to www.floridarealtors.org, and there's an Amendment 4 icon on the front page there, the main page. Click on that and find out lots of good information. Or you can go to a third-party site that was put together by Taxpayers First, and that is www.taxyourassetsoff.com.
Well, excellent. If somebody wants to get a hold of you by email to find out something more, or if they've got a group that they want you to send information for, what is your email address, John?
Is John, Johns, as in Sam, at floridarealtors.org.
Excellent. John, thank you so much. It was great to meet you over the airwaves. I'm sure we will, our paths will cross again. I'd like to have you on a show again because you and I could probably talk an hour on 4 or 5 issues.
Yeah,
John,
thanks again for having me today, and vote yes on 4.
Vote yes on 4. Thank you so much, John, and you have a wonderful weekend.
Great, thanks.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
All right, that was John Sebree, Senior Vice President for Public Policy, Florida Realtors. He came on today pushing Amendment 4. The housing economy, the housing market makes such a big difference. If it is down, then it affects the economy and what happens. If we can provide incentives to have more people buy, to have more interaction, to have more sales, then everybody should be affected in a positive way. So, as John said, vote yes for Amendment 4. We're going to go for a quick break, and we'll be right back.
MarkNet Alliance is a national, membership-based network of 41 auction companies. Our companies are successful auction professionals with proven track records and thriving businesses. The MarkNet companies have a staff of over 540 employees who are working hard every day to meet the goals of their clients during our ever-changing economy. MarkNet companies are able to achieve these goals through cutting-edge technologies and ever-growing investor pools. To view the hundreds of auctions currently being conducted, or for more information, visit marknetalliance.com.
All right, we're back. You're listening to the National Real Estate Auction Radio Show. I'm your host, Doug Dennison. We broadcast every Friday live from beautiful St. Augustine, Florida. This show will also be on RowAuctions.com, and it will also go to YouTube. So, exciting show. John Sebree, Senior Vice President for Public Policy, Florida Realtors. Again, I've never met him, but it seems that we've had a similar past. Want to talk about our sponsor, Rowell Auctions. They are a national real estate auction firm that started in 1936. They do online auctions, on-site auctions, and ballroom auctions. They have offices in Florida, New Jersey, California, Georgia, and have alliances with auctioneers and real estate brokers across the country. They do government auctions, bankruptcy auctions, and much more. They've got a big auction schedule coming up, so check out their website at www.rowellauctions.com. That's www.rowellauctions.com. Or you can call them at 800-323-8388. That's 800-323-8388. And again, they are having a great deal of success selling bank properties. A lot of them are being sold absolute, which means that they sell to the highest bidder regardless of price. That is good for the seller, good for the buyer, and it's good for the real estate agents too, because Rowell Auctions is very invested in working with real estate brokers, both on getting the property promoted and working with a local broker as a local broker headquarters, and also saying, hey, real estate brokers, bring us your buyers. We will pay you a commission to bring those buyers, register properly, by fax or by email, by getting your buyer registered, needs his signature, needs your signature, get it in on time. And especially with these absolute auctions, I mean, hey, they're gonna be sold. They're gonna be sold. So you want to make sure that you get your buyer to the table, whether it's a live auction or an internet auction, and tell your buyer about it. And again, the way you find out about these and the properties that some of your people may be interested in is to go on the website, RowellAuctions.com. That's ROWELL, auctions with an S.com. There's a whole bunch coming up. We should have a whole bunch before the end of the year. This is usually when banks need to show that they are getting rid of some of their inventory by the end of the year, so it's always a positive for buyers. Again, our listeners are real estate investors, real estate agents, general public, real estate media, government officials, banking people, bankruptcy attorneys, and thrilled to have, again, John Sebree on as a spokesman for the Florida Realtors. He's the Senior Vice President for Public Policy. He has been up to Washington for many years, too, on behalf of the Realtor Association, and he's a good guy. He's a native of Kentucky, and got really involved in the RTC legislation because he was a staff at the House of Representatives Committee on Banking, Finance, and Urban Affairs. That's important stuff, and as he said, that's pretty heady, exciting stuff for a young guy. But after being up there many years, and again, I was up in Washington D.C. pushing the 14,000 surplus properties that need to be sold because they're costing the American taxpayer millions of dollars, actually billions of dollars, in holding cost. But while I'm up there, that's exactly who are doing a lot of the work. Young guys like John was when he was there, many, many years ago. I think the average age, somebody told me, of the staff is like 26, and part of that is because it is such difficult work. They're spending many, many hours per day trying to help the Congress people, the Congress legislators, the senators, and the congressmen to figure out how to vote. And these bills, they're crazy because they're They're very big and they're very long, and believe it or not, your elected officials can't read all of that. They have to have good staff that they trust to give them information and say, this is the great way to go. And so again, it was nice to have John on the air. He's the Senior Vice President for Public Policy, Florida Realtors. We will be back next week. I'm going to be talking more about 14,000 government surplus properties. Again, these government surplus properties are warehouses. They are office buildings. They're courthouses. They're parcels of land. These are not, and I repeat, not the homes and condominiums and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Nothing about that. It's 14,000 government surplus properties that need to be sold. They sit there every year. Again, I was in Miami, a courthouse that costs the American taxpayer $1.2 million a year, every year, and has been abandoned for 5 years at $6 million. Needs to be sold. Anyway, we will be back next week. I thank you for listening. Enjoy your weekend and have fun with your family.